Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This story is narrated in 2 books. Book 2. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review to be printed in a newspaper, magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on the actual life of a Muslim family in Sudan. Therefore, all names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. Chapter 22. Pagan Rituals in Islam. While she is waiting for an answer from the University of Toronto, Dr. Natasha came up with an idea, but both her Sudanese brother and her Ethiopian girlfriend strongly stood against it. Even so, Dr. Natasha became obstinate, and for the first time she openly opposed her brother's firm decision. Wahid and his wife opposed her idea because it is going to involve a high risk. Dr. Natasha proposed to make a second visit to the Muslim world and learn more about the Muslim practice of the Hajj rituals, which is an Islamic annual pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina cities in Saudi Arabia. Around over 2 million Muslims, men and women, from all over the world annually visit the holy shrine of Kaaba and perform the compulsory Islamic pilgrimage which called Hajj. Dr. Natasha decided to pretend once again that she is a devout Muslim woman and visit Saudi Arabia to learn about that important practice of the Muslims and witness firsthand the social status of the Saudi women. For Dr. Natasha to undertake such a dangerous mission, she needs to conceal her identity and create a new one that no one could recognize her. After her troubles in Sudan, Dr. Natasha became known all over the Arab and Muslim world. So, the first step she needs to take is to change her name and last name. After officially changing her name and last name, she is required to marry someone, or at least to pretend to be married to a Muslim man. This is because a young single Muslim woman under the Sharia law is not allowed to travel alone in a Muslim country. She could travel with her husband, father, brother, or grown-up son. Thirdly, Dr. Natasha needed to learn all the Islamic rituals of pilgrimage. Despite all these necessary steps, if Dr. Natasha has been caught by the Saudi police authority while she is pretending to be a Muslim when she is not, then the punishment is death by either beheading or stoning to death. Many Christians and other non-Muslims were caught in the past, or at least accused of being pretending or spying for Israel or an agent of the West, and put to death. Notwithstanding, there were some non-Muslims who succeeded in visiting the holy shrine of the Muslims without being caught. The most famous case was Richard Burton, who pretended to be a Muslim and visited Mecca, took a small piece of the black stone, and subjected it to a scientific test. The test proved that the black stone is part of the shattered pieces of a meteor. Before the advent of Islam, the Arabs venerated 2 types of stones, volcanic and meteoric, because they believed the former erupted from the earth and the latter fell from the walls of the house of Allah in heaven. When Richard Burton returned to Europe and announced his secret visit and his great discovery, he created great indignation in the Muslim world. The wrath of Muslims was intensified when he claimed that his discovery refuted the false claim of the Islamic myth that the black stone is a holy stone. The Islamic myth says, when Adam was driven out of heaven, he took a stone from paradise and brought it down with him. The stone was so bright and white but turned into black stone because it sucks the sins of those who kiss it every year during the Hajj. Another myth said the white stone became black stone because the pagan Arab women used to apply their menses blood on it with the belief it would increase their fertilities and give them more children. After the secret visit of Richard Burton, the police authority in Saudi Arabia became stricter with the pilgrims, and each visitor has to be carefully scrutinized prior a Western visa is issued to him and before he is admitted in the Muslims' holy land. Sami Ahmed and his wife Dr. Nadia Ahmed arrived at Jeddah International Airport in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia after an exceedingly long trip from Toronto International Airport in Canada. The first thing that caught their attention is the masses of passengers. Over 2 million Muslims from all over the world arrive every year in Mecca City to perform the Hajj rituals. It is impossible for the person to move one step in that crowded arrival hall without touching or being touched by a stranger. Even as a married woman, Dr. Nadia could not prevent the male passengers from touching her body and violating her privacy. Many times, she felt the hands of male passengers purposely touching her chest, backside, and the area around her private parts. The only thing she could do is to keep pushing away those wandering male hands and protect her body as much as she could. Sometimes, she felt a male pushing himself on her backside until she could feel his erected penis rubbing itself on her body. To stop herself from being touched in that improper manner, she requested her husband to protect her back. However, whenever her husband walked behind her, she exposed her body from the front and male hands would keep touching and feeling her big breasts. Finally, she concluded that she could do nothing to stop those evil men from forcing themselves on her body. It took them a couple of hours to emerge out of that sea of passengers and climb into a crowded bus. Fortunately, on the bus, Dr. Nadia found a seat and sat between two women. As soon as she sat, she felt her clothes from behind became wet due to some cold liquid. She put her hand and felt the liquid that was smearing on her abaya. She was shocked when she found a man's semen on her dress. She understood that a male pilgrim has rubbed his phallus on her buttocks until he ejaculated and smeared her dress with his semen. She has extremely outraged and hated that sex fiend who dared to sexually abuse her to that extent without her knowledge. She wondered how such a sex pervert could claim to be a holy pilgrim who came to perform such an important compulsory and Islamic obligation. The bus took them to the place where the rituals of the Islamic Hajj would begin on the same day of their arrival. As soon as they emerged off the bus, they found themselves in a more crowded place than the arrival hall at the international airport. They could hardly move one step without pushing and forcing themselves through the masses of the pilgrims. There are no separate places for men and women. Males and females are mixing freely, and there are no restrictions for their movements. Even the washrooms are open for both sexes. Every woman is wearing a hijab and abaya while her face and hands are fully exposed. In fact, women are not allowed to do the Hajj rituals while their faces are covered by niqabs. Ironically, women are not allowed to reveal their faces in public in Saudi Arabia except during the Hajj rituals. Men are hardly covering their bodies. Their upper parts are exposed, and they are wearing white clothes known as the ihram clothes. The male pilgrims are not allowed to wear any underwear. Dr. Nadia is shocked when she saw men have been dressed up in those semi-naked garments. Once again, Dr. Nadia found herself facing those annoying sexual harassment by the male pilgrims. But this time the harassment is more serious than before. Dr. Nadia regretted that she came to that country. While she was in Canada, she heard many things about the segregation of males and females in Saudi Arabia. However, her first day in the Holy Land of the Muslims refuted those false claims. While she was studying the Hajj rituals at the university in Canada, she learned that it was a pagan religious practice, and the Arab pagans practiced it hundreds of years before the coming of Islam. It has nothing to do with Judaism and Christianity. It is called hak, which means rubbing of the body. Pagan women used to rub their bodies on the Kaaba and apply their menses blood on the black stone to increase their fertilities and get more progenies. In pre-Islam, men used to do the rituals while they were bare naked. Islam incorporated the pagan rituals of the Hajj with slight changes. As a matter of fact, many scholars proved that Hajj was a kind of temple prostitution. Women offered themselves to men as part of the pagan worship of their many idols, male gods and female goddesses. The black stone was considered the cornerstone of that immoral temple prostitution rituals. Although Islam removed the idols from the pagan temple, still the black stone was spared, and the immoral mixing between men and women remained the same to the present day. An Egyptian Muslim scholar called Dr. Sayyid Mahmoud al-Kimni said the black stone has been curved and made in the shape of the woman's vagina. In those days, the pagans worshipped the private parts of the female, and that's why women used to apply the blood of their menses on the vagina-like stone. Today, a Muslim female might not be able to reach the stone due to the crowd, but she is required to point her right hand from far towards it. But the Muslim man must kiss the black stone at least once during his 7 circling around the Kaaba. The kissing of the stone has no spiritual significance, but Muslim men do it because the Prophet Muhammad used to kiss it whenever he performed his Hajj. The second Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab said while he was kissing the black stone, "I know you are just stone and can do no good or bad to me, but I am kissing you because I saw the Messenger of Allah kissing you." The Caliph Omar might not know why the Prophet Muhammad had kissed the stone, but for the pagans, the kissing of the black stone was a form of worshipping the woman's pussy. Muslim men today are continuing that pagan worship of the female private parts. The Hajj rituals begin with the Kaaba, but continue in other places. Each pilgrim must walk counterclockwise 7 times around the Black Kaaba, the cube-shaped building which acts as the Muslim direction of prayer. He runs back and forth between the hills of Al-Safa and Al-Marwa, drinks from the Zamzam well, goes to the plains of Mount Arafat to stand in vigil, and throws stones in a ritual stoning of the devil, symbolizing stoning the accursed Satan. Those rituals have to be completed in 5 days, starting on the 8th and ending on the 12th day of the lunar month of Tul, Hajj, the month of Hajj. During those 5 days, Dr. Nadia went through so many sexual harassment. She was touched and fondled on her breasts and buttocks by at least 100 men. She could not believe that those Muslim men came over there to perform a religious obligation. Young women are not so many over the place, and hence she became a target of sexual harassment everywhere she went. She and her husband quarreled many times with those evil males who made her the object of their sexual fantasies. Those who could not reach her physically kept staring at her as if she were walking bare naked in that crowded place. Dr. Nadia has to endure a lot of sexual harassment during those 5 days of performing those satanic rituals. Unfortunately, what she came to see and study she could not be able to find or learn. She came to see how Saudi women are treated in that male-dominated country. But what she saw and experienced is more than what a person could expect to see and go through in a bar or nightclub full of jerks and hookers. While the pilgrims were encircling the Kaaba, Dr. Nadia and her husband felt the great heaviness in their chests and almost suffocated from the demonic presence of the unseeing evil forces. No one could convince them that that heaviness was not due to the satanic forces that controlled the hearts and minds of those pilgrims. Every place they went and during every ritual they witnessed that heaviness in their hearts. When the pilgrims began to stone the devil, Dr. Nadia had an unbearable headache. She was compelled to ask her husband to lay his hand on her head and pray for her relief from that heavy panging inside her head. On that day, Dr. Nadia thought the devil would kill her for daring to step in his territory. Her husband Sammy too fell sick and began to experience nausea. It is nothing short of a miracle when those 5 days passed without any of the couple being suffocated to death during those unholy and satanic rituals of the pagan Hajj. Despite the uncountable problems that Dr. Nadia experienced during those 5 hellish days, still, she could be able to talk to so many Muslim women from various countries. She pretended that she is a new convert to Islam, and she is working on academic research in which she wants to answer the critiques of non-Muslims in the West. She prepared a set of questions that she asked every Muslim woman she talked to. To her amazement, almost all the Muslim women she interviewed gave similar answers to her questions. All of them denied that they had been abused by their fathers when they were living under their authorities or by their husbands after they got married to them, and that Islam honored the women. Dr. Nadia discussed with them some anti-feminine practices such as polygamy, child marriage, female genital mutilation, the liability of the wife to be divorced by her husband and her inability to divorce her husband. Custody of children after divorce goes to the father, the inability of some women to go to school or work, and wife beating. The women collectively told Dr. Nadia that they do not see anything wrong with those practices as long as they are justified by their holy Quran and the blessed Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. Not every place in Saudi Arabia is the Muslim Holy Land. Mecca, Medina, and other small towns are called Arad al-Hijaz, or the Land of Hajj. Non-Muslim foreigners could visit any city in the kingdom except that land of Hajj. If a non-Muslim is caught in that forbidden area, he will be executed by the authority. Muslims believe that if a non-Muslim who is known as an infidel has pretended to be a Muslim and goes inside that holy land, he would be exposed by Allah. There are stories told by Muslims all over the Muslim countries of some infidels who pretended to be Muslims and went near the house of Allah, the Black Kaaba. As soon as they stepped inside that holy ground, they began to shake, scream, and fell on the ground and rolled around like epileptic people. Then, those people were arrested and interrogated. They admitted that they were not Muslims but pretenders. Shortly after their confessions, some of them got stoned to death and others beheaded. Another story related to the House of Allah is that when the first man who landed on the moon had heard the call for prayer that shouts 5 times in the day from the mosque of the Kaaba. Millions of Muslims believe such a false claim of the muezzin's voice had been heard in the moon by Neil Armstrong. For those who are not in the know, Neil Alden Armstrong was an American astronaut and aeronautical engineer, and the first person to walk on the moon. Chapter 23. The Fate of Lovers in Islam. In many Muslim countries, for a girl love before marriage is a crime that leads to either death through honor killing by her family or is stoned to death by the Sharia court. Despite that, some daring Muslim girls take the risk and fall in love with their male neighbors or other boys in their areas. One of those girls is a beautiful teenage girl called Saham Ahmed Wadkabo. Her male cousin is Jamal Mahmoud Wadkabo, is a Sudanese man who is living for 10 years in Saudi Arabia and working as a medical doctor in the King Fahd Royal Hospital. He is the only son, and his parents love him so much. He loves his parents too and blindly obeys them in everything. He is a graduate of Khartoum University. He has his MBBS degree in medicine from the University of Khartoum. Recently, his parents made him marry his female cousin, Saham Ahmed Wadkabo. It is not a love marriage, but an arranged and compulsory marriage. Jamal has never loved any girl before he got married to his female cousin. He was so involved with his study while he was in medical college, and after he got a job in Saudi Arabia, he dedicated all his time to his patients and their problems. However, his female cousin, Siham, is in a serious love affair with her neighbor and wanted to marry him. But her father, against her wishes, married her to her educated male cousin Jamal, who is working as a medical doctor in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately, Jamal knew nothing of his to-be wife's mad love for her neighbor. If he knew about it, he would not have married her. As soon as he married his female cousin, Jamal returned to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and began the process of bringing his new bride to live with him. He spent only 3 days in Sudan with his new bride. During those 3 days, Siham succeeded in hiding her love affair from her new groom. Her love for her handsome male neighbor is deeply rooted in her heart, and nothing could uproot it. Even though she loves her male neighbor, but the lovers did not have any sex. So, when he married his cousin Saham and consummated his marriage with her, Jamal found his bride to be a sealed virgin. It took Jamal less than a month to get a spouse visa and bring his lovely bride to live with him in the holy land of Muslims. After her arrival in Riyadh City, Saham resumed her affair and secretly continued to communicate with her lover through the phone and sometimes sent letters to him. She told her lover not to write back or phone her. She would call him on the phone whenever she found a chance to do so. Since her husband is busy in his work, Saham found ample space and time to carry on with her love affair. However, intimate lovers are not satisfied by communicating through writing and talking on the phone. They always long to be near each other and express their love through kissing and hugging. Siham and her boyfriend were doing that when they were living near each other in Sudan. In order for them to be together again, the intimate lovers have made a secret plan. According to the plan, Saham's lover has to apply for a job in Saudi Arabia and then come and live near his beloved. The lover followed the plan and applied for a working visa to Saudi Arabia. As soon as he obtained the visa, he traveled from Sudan to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Hashim Sheikh Talha is the crazy lover who refused to accept the fact that the love affair has no place in a Muslim country, and he determined to pursue his beloved wherever she went. He studied engineering at Khartoum University. After his graduation, he became a highly successful engineer. When he arrived in Riyadh, he stayed briefly with his friend. Shortly after, he moved from his friend's apartment and rented an apartment in a building occupied mostly by Sudanese tenants. Hashim has not moved to that apartment because he loves his Sudanese people, but because his beloved Siham is living with her husband in that building. Everything worked perfectly for the two lovers, and they began to live remarkably close to each other. Not only that, whenever Siham's husband goes to work, she calls her lover on the phone and asks him to come to her. Being met after a long and painful separation, the lovers denied nothing to each other. Whenever they met, they kissed, hugged, and had sex. Before Siham got married to her cousin, the lovers had never had sex together. In those days, they scared that sex might result in a big disaster to their affair, especially if Siham became pregnant. No pharmacy or any store in Sudan is authorized to sell condoms. It is more dangerous to be caught by a condom in your pocket than drugs or alcohol bottle. Moreover, abortion is an illegal surgery and serious crime punishable by the Sharia court. However, after her marriage, Siham is no more scared of being impregnated by someone who isn't her husband. She knows if she gets impregnated by her lover, everyone will think that the baby is her husband's child. Even her extremely busy husband will think that Allah has blessed him with a baby. Nevertheless, what the intimate lovers Siham and Hashim are doing would not remain hidden forever in a closed and strict Muslim society like Saudi Arabia. Their Sudanese neighbors have eyes to see and brains to think. Therefore, they understood that a haram secret relationship is going on under their noses and in front of their eyes. Many times, some curious Sudanese have spotted Hashim entering the apartment of Dr. Jamal, and that is in his absence. According to the Islamic Sharia, the Muslim wife is not supposed to allow any man to enter her house in her husband's absence, even if that man happened to be her father-in-law. She could allow her own father or brother to enter her house even if her husband isn't there. Some of those righteous neighbors made phone calls to Dr. Jamal and disclosed to him what was going on in his back. Some of them even wrote anonymous letters and mailed them to him through his hospital's address. Although Dr. Jamal lived with his wife for over a year, he has never suspected that she is having love affair with another man, and she could do something like that behind his back. He knew from day one that their marriage was not based on love, but was an arranged marriage. However, he thought like any other Sudanese girl his wife would be happy and satisfied by what her luck in life had brought to her. In Sudan, it is great honor and fortune for the girl and her family if she gets married to a Sudanese man who is working in Saudi Arabia or the other petrodollar Gulf countries. Some Sudanese girls say, "I want to marry such a Sudanese man, even if he looks as ugly as a dog or unclean pig." Moreover, Jamal and Siham's marriage had been arranged and done with the blessings of their parents. The news of his wife who is cheating on him has exceedingly troubled Dr. Jamal and made him to think of punishing his unfaithful female life partner. But before carrying out his retribution, Dr. Jamal has decided to verify the rumor. If at all she is cheating on him, he knows that he could catch her red-handed with the other man, and that would give him good excuse to divorce her and send her back to her family in Khartoum. Dr. Jamal never thought of killing his wife or sending her to the Sharia court to be stoned to death for cheating on him. He does not want to ruin his life by killing his wife or exposing his female cousin and destroying the name of his family and her family. After all, she is his blood relative, and her scandal will be a scandal to him and family too. Alas, before Dr. Jamal has carried out his plan, his neighbors did what they thought their duty as good Muslim neighbors should do. Some of them thought that Dr. Jamal either did not believe the information that reached him through the phone or wrote or knew it, but does not want to do anything about it. Accordingly, the news of the Sudanese wife who is cheating on her husband reached the police authority of the Riyadh city. Consequently, one day Siham and Hashim have been caught by the Riyadh police while they are in bed. The police broke down the door and rushed inside the apartment. Unfortunately, when the cops raided the apartment, the lover and his beloved happened to be in bed, and they are making love to each other. They are both bare naked when they have been caught in the very act of committing adultery. After their arrest and harshly being interrogated by the police, both lovers have admitted their secret love affair and adulterous relation. During her interrogation, Siham has not only been beaten up by the male cops who interrogated her, but she has been gang raped by many of them. A few days later, the two lovers have been tried and convicted by an Islamic Sharia court. According to the decision of that court, Hashim has been sentenced to receive 100 lashes because he committed adultery with a woman who is not his lawful wife. Siham has been sentenced to be stoned to death for committing adultery with a man who isn't her husband while she is a married woman who has another husband. Chapter 24. The Good Samaritan Canadians. While the case of Siham and Hashim is occupying the media and their so-called disgraceful story is in the tongue of every Sudanese living in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Dr. Nadia and her husband Sami completed their religious rituals of the Hajj in Mecca City and moved out of the Holy Land and came to Riyadh City to spend the remaining time of their 6 months in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It so happened that the couple coincidentally rented the same apartment that the lover Hashim used to occupy before he was arrested by the police of Riyadh along with his girlfriend Siham. As soon as Dr. Nadia and her husband Sami moved into that building, their Sudanese neighbors approached them and broke the disturbing news to them. Haj Mosa and his wife Haja Nafisa are the Sudanese neighbors who introduced themselves to Dr. Nadia and her husband Sami and informed them about the scandal of the Sudanese adulterers who brought great shame to the name of the Muslim Sudanese community. In Riyadh, they narrated the scandal with great details and added many happenings to it which never happened. For example, they said that there are many conflicting reports about the actual story. Some people believed that Dr. Jamal is a sexually impotent man and that his sexually unsatisfied wife had an affair with their neighbor and had sex with him. Other people claimed that the affair between the adulterers began in Khartoum before the adulterous girl got married to her male cousin. This story is confirmed by some neighbors who obtained the information directly from Sudan. Yet, one more rumor said that the beautiful Siham is used to be a high-profile prostitute in Khartoum and most of her clients are business tycoons and top officials in the government. Some shameless liars claimed that they had slept with her when they were in Sudan. Nonetheless, Dr. Nadia and her husband are not interested in those rumors, but their main concern is the fate of those misfortunate lovers. It happened to be when they moved in that building the case of the adulterous lovers has not yet been tried by the Sharia court. They are also concerned about the husband who has been boycotted by all Sudanese communities after his wife was caught having zina with his neighbor. In fact, after his wife was arrested, Dr. Jamal stopped going to his work and spent all his time locking himself in his apartment. He is rarely seen by the neighbors going out of his hiding place. When they realized that everyone distanced themselves from him, Dr. Nadia tried to convince her husband to go and introduce themselves to Dr. Jamal and counsel him and offer any help he might need in such a difficult time. Sami is reluctant to accept the suggestion of his wife because he thought Dr. Jamal might not accept them and kick them out of his apartment. Even so, Dr. Nadia insisted that they should just give it a try. Against his wish, Sami yielded to the pressure of his wife and accompanied her to the apartment of their lonely neighbor. To their surprise, their sad neighbor welcomed them and expressed his appreciation of their coming. Dr. Jamal informed his neighbors, Dr. Nadia and Sami, how deeply he has been affected by the unfaithfulness of his wife and how he is suffering day and night due to that nasty scandal. He told them further that he found it difficult to go back to his work since the case of his wife received huge media coverage and became known all over the kingdom. Also, he said, he does not want to go back to Sudan because the disgraceful scandal has already reached his family and his wife's parents in Khartoum. How could he meet his family, friends, and relatives after his disloyal wife has openly committed adultery with his neighbor and caught bare naked in his bed with another man? He didn't know before marriage that his cousin Siham is having a love affair with her neighbor Hashim. Even his cousin did not tell him that she is in love with another man. If he knew it, he said, he would not have married her. Those worries and thoughts are tormenting him day and night. He even admitted that he is having a strong suicidal tendency. It became impossible for him to step out of his apartment and show his face to his Sudanese neighbors. For that reason, many times he thought of killing himself and relieve himself from those torturing thoughts and the abominable scandalous adultery of his wife. Finally, Dr. Jamal confessed to his kind visitors that he began to hate his wife after she destroyed his life and disgraced the honor of his family and her parents. Her evil act closed all doors in his face and destroyed his successful medical profession. Therefore, there is no place on earth that can shelter him from this scandal except the grave. Dr. Nadia and her life partner Sammy used every possible way in counseling their sad neighbor. They tried to convince him not to kill himself for a mistake that he had no hand in it. In addition, they strove hard to convince him to forgive his wife because it was not fully her mistake. Society had the upper hand in that tragedy. She was forced by her parents to cut her love affair with her neighbor and marry someone she did not love. Dr. Nadia and her husband frequented their visits to Dr. Jamal's apartment and spent many hours talking to him and trying to help him to overcome his tragedy. They even invited him to their apartment and served dinner cooked by them. Therefore, the love and care that Dr. Nadia and her husband Sammy have shown to their neighbor helped him to overcome his sadness and made him look at the case of his wife in a positive way. He understood that she was a victim of the unfair society she was born and brought up in. She did not commit a crime by falling in love with her neighbor Hisham. She supposed to marry the man she saw the dream of her life would be fulfilled in him. He blamed himself for selfishly marrying a girl without trying to find out whether she is in love with someone else or not. He even understood that he was not supposed to marry a girl and that he had no emotional attachment with her before marriage. He told his good neighbors that in all his life he is more interested in his study, career, and work, and he has never looked for a girl to love. He finally understood that arranged marriage is not the right way to get a female life partner. While Dr. Nadia and her husband Sammy are counseling their heartbroken neighbor, the Sharia court looked into the serious case of Siham and found her guilty of adultery and sentenced her to be stoned to death on the following Friday after the noon public prayer. The harsh sentence has filled the already bleeding heart of her husband with so much agony and sorrow. It has also filled the hearts of his compassionate neighbors with a cloud of sadness and terror. The Canadian couple knew that they could do nothing to change the decision of the Islamic court because it is the judgment of Allah and His Prophet, and therefore there is no mortal being could revoke it. Even the king of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia cannot cancel it. Despite that, Dr. Nadia somehow convinced Dr. Jamal to approach the Sharia court and informed the Maulana who passed the judgment that he is ready to forgive his wife and take her back. Although Dr. Jamal expected that the court would not accept his forgiveness and pardon his wife, still he followed the advice of Dr. Nadia and talked to the court authority. The Sharia court did not only reject his appeal but published it in the newspapers. When the Sudanese community came to know through the media that Dr. Jamal forgave his adulterous wife and wanted to take her back, they hated him with more bitterness. They considered him to be the most useless and coward Sudanese man ever existed. The president of the Sudanese community in Riyadh City said in a TV interview that Dr. Jamal and his adulterous wife are stigmas on the bright face of Sudan. He further said that any Sudanese man in his place would not hesitate for a second to slay his unfaithful wife on honor killing instead. That shameless doctor went and begged the Sharia court to stop carrying the judgment of Allah on his adulterous cousin sister, and without shame, he wanted to take her back as a wife. Shortly after the Islamic court rejected the appeal of the dejected husband, the date of the stoning of his wife has been announced through all media channels in the capital city of Saudi Arabia. It has been scheduled to take place on a Friday noontime after the public congregational prayer. Every Sudanese in Riyadh decided to attend and participate in the stoning in order to show his condemnation of that disgraceful act that one of the Sudanese women did while she is lawfully married to another Sudanese man. Sudanese women vowed that they would take part in the stoning if the police authority would allow them to do so. But their requests have been rejected on a religious basis, and only their husbands, brothers, and sons could join the faithful Muslims after the Friday prayer and stone the condemned adulterous woman. Chapter 25. The stoning of the Sudanese girl Siham. The stoning ground is in an open area which can be seen from the building where Dr. Nadia and her husband Sammy are living. The couple decided to witness the stoning from the window of their apartment and videotape it. They know it would be hard for them to watch that barbaric and cruel punishment of an innocent young woman, but still they decided to watch it so that they could expose it in the future to the outside world when they return to Canada. Dr. Nadia has brought with her very sharp and powerful camera that could shoot an event from an exceedingly far distance. On the stoning day, her camera has captured the brutal stoning as if she is watching it from a remarkably close distance. She used her camera to shoot a video. At the same time, her husband, Sammy, used another camera to take some photos of the same cruel stoning. This is how the camera of Dr. Nadia videotaped the stoning. Around 12:45 p.m., the ground has been crowded with men dressed in white garments, and all of them have long beards and somber and angry faces. They are males, big as well as small. Even male children have been brought there by their fathers or big brothers. They looked like monsters and worshippers of Lucifer. None of them appeared as a holy man who is worshipping a true and loving deity. There are with them small male children who dressed up and looked like their fathers. None of those kids are smiling or have a childlike face. They also look like small demons. Dr. Nadia could distinguish Sudanese men from other men due to their black colors and big white turbans. Shortly after the gathering of the so-called faithful men and children of Allah, the condemned adulterous woman has been brought by a police car. She is handcuffed and her legs are securely fastened by chains. She is dressed up in black abaya and niqab that covers her entire body. When they dragged her out of the car, she was shaking and screaming and calling for help. She is begging the police officers to spare her life. None of them seemed to heed her crying and pleading. A couple of policemen dragged her like an animal until they brought her to the middle of the crowd. There is already a hole that dug for her burial. Then, the police forcibly inserted her resisting body inside that hole. Some men came and buried her until her neck. Only her neck and head are visible while the rest of her body is completely buried underground. After that, her face was uncovered so that everyone could see her. She is also expected to see those people who have gathered around her to stone her to death. Those policemen forcefully tore the black niqab from her face. They are like two wolves tearing out the flesh of an innocent lamb. When her face is uncovered, Dr. Nadia has never seen such a beautiful young Sudanese woman before. Even during her stay in Sudan, she had not seen a single Sudanese girl as beautiful as Siham. She is having very fair complexion as if she is a daughter of a white woman and a Sudanese man. She has exceedingly long black hair. Through her beautiful face, Dr. Nadia saw a very frightened young woman. In the meantime, the condemned girl Siham continued to scream and call for help. She even called upon the names of her Allah and her Prophet Muhammad to come and rescue her from that cruel and painful death. Neither her Allah came down from heaven nor her Prophet Muhammad resurrected from his grave in Medina city. No one among her executioners and her Sudanese people have showed pity towards her except Dr. Nadia and her husband Sammy, who are standing on their balcony and watching the execution from a far distance. From their balcony, they could also see many Sudanese women gathered in groups of 2s, 3s, and 4s to witness the event. They are standing on the windows of their apartments and looking as if they are watching an important soccer match. Some of them are using long-range observation binoculars to see the stoning. None of them seem to have pity on the victim girl. Even their small underage girls have been made to watch such brutal stoning. Then, an old man who looks like the devil has come forward and shouted Allah Akbar and cast the first 3 stones on the head of Siham. 1 stone missed her and the other 2 hit her face and head. Then, the old man retreated to his place in the lined-up men who formed a half-circle around their victim. As soon as the old man reached his place, the other men began to cast their stones on Siham's face and her head. The stones hit her from all directions, and the blood gushed out of her face and head like red acid. In the beginning, Siham's head kept circling in all directions, desperately trying to avoid the stones. Her screaming could not be heard due to the shouting of the men in unison, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar. They are all hard-hearted like those terrorists of ISIS who rejoiced on the beheading of their hapless victims. The victim's head stopped moving and fell backward, which showed that her neck had been broken by those heavy and big stones. Although the head became lifeless, still the cruel men continued to throw their stones until they made big heap over their victim. After all stones have been thrown on the head of Siham, the police authority announced through loudspeakers that the stoning should cease. Then, a group of cops came and removed the stones. When all stones are removed, Siham's face has become marred and completely disfigured. No one who saw her face before her execution could believe it was the same beautiful, angelic face. It is covered by blood and totally smashed. Its mouth lost all its teeth, and its head lost its long hair. Her toothless mouth is opened as if it is the jaws of a deadly shark. The blood is still running from her face. Even her black clothes have been torn into bits and pieces, exposing her buried and dug-out body. The hot sand of the Sahara Desert caused so many burnings in her delicate skin. It is too graphic to describe in detail the miserable condition of that cruelly executed victim. During the cruel and barbaric stoning of Siham, Dr. Nadia and her husband Sammy are continuously weeping, and the tears running from their eyes and falling on their cheeks like hot acid. When she saw the horrific face of Siham after the stones have been removed from it, Dr. Nadia collapsed on her knees and began to cry in loud voice. Finally, the dead body of the cruelly executed young woman has been dragged like a slaughtered animal and placed on a stretcher and carried away. The crowd dispersed as soon as the dead body had been cleared from the crime scene. While they are leaving, they are conversing with each other as if they are discussing a wonderful sport game they have just watched together. Even their female counterparts have remained standing on their windows, talking and laughing. Some wicked Sudanese women clapped their hands and cheered to their men, who supposedly have carried out the judgment of Allah and His Prophet on the so-called evil and dirty bitch who spoiled the bright name of Sudan.